This program tells the remarkable story of a truly iconic aircraft. The Hawker Hunter was the most successful of the British post-war supersonic jets. By combining sleek design and superb performance, the Hunter became highly popular with all the pilots who flew it. Since the maiden flight of the very first Hunter prototype in 1951, the aircraft was continually modified and improved until there were 25 variants exported to 22 countries all around the world. The Hunter is now a favourite at air shows both here in the UK and abroad. At the end of this DVD, you'll see extraordinary footage of 15 vintage Hunters flying in delta formation over the Gloucestershire countryside, a sight not witnessed in Britain for many years. But until then, sit back and enjoy the fascinating story of one of Britain's greatest aircraft. The great Alfred Bill Bedford was Hawker Siddeley's chief test pilot between 1956 and 1967. What are his memories of the Hawker Hunter?
Well, the beautiful Hunter is engraved on my heart. And I think it's true to say that the aeroplane was one of the most successful post-war fighter aeroplanes produced in this country. Some 1,970 new aircraft were built and 400 of them were refurbished. It sold like hotcakes the world over and was well loved by all pilots who flew it. I think this was largely because it was a very forgiving aeroplane, and in its day it had outstandingly good handling qualities. It had good climb, good acceleration, and extremely good maneuverability. Combined with this, it had a wide track undercarriage and was very forgiving of crosswinds and bad handling by some pilots. So it's made its mark internationally as what is known as a real pilot's aeroplane.
To become such a hugely successful aircraft, the Hunter had to undergo a long and difficult development phase. Perhaps not surprising, because it first flew only 12 years after the maiden flight of the first ever jet. The Heinkel HE-178 made history on the 17th of August 1939 as the first ever jet to become airborne. It was too primitive to be of any practical use and was hardly any faster than the piston engine aircraft of the period, but it was still the embodiment of a new technique full of dazzling possibilities, although at the time technical knowledge was not advanced enough for it to fulfill its early promise. However, World War II gave new impetus to aeronautical research, and in 1942 the first operational jet took off. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was powered by flowjet engines, and it outstripped all other fighters. It took more than 2 years before the Schwalbe went into combat action, too late for it to have any influence on the final stages of the war. The engines of the Me-262 were still fairly primitive, with very high fuel consumption and a very short life, yet the jet engine proved its superiority in air combat. In Great Britain, research on the jet engine began around the same time. Although the first British jet flew as early as 1941, the first operational British jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor, arrived too late to see action during World War II. Another British pioneer was the de Havilland Vampire. The Vampire was powered by only one engine, known as the Goblin, and was slower than the Meteor with its two Rolls-Royce engines. But by the end of the war, the Goblin was the most powerful jet engine in the world. In fact, all British jet engines of the period were far superior to those of other countries, something which did not escape the attention of the Americans. The first American jet, the Bell XP-59 Aerocomet, made its first flight powered by General Electric-built engines of British design. In 1943, Lockheed designed an aeroplane around the de Havilland Goblin, resulting in the first operational US jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star. When the Allied armies marched into Germany at the end of World War II, they discovered a treasure trove of documents and test reports on Nazi fighter designs. It was found that German aerodynamic knowledge in particular was very well developed. For instance, the swept wing, which was the second step in the direction of higher speeds after the jet engine, had already been incorporated into operational designs. One of the most striking examples of German aerodynamics was the Messerschmitt Me-163. By combining a tailless glider design with a Walter R-11 rocket engine, this small and extremely fast fighter was born. The Comet was built for the same kind of mission that saw the construction of the Hunter. In the shortest possible time, the airplane had to take off, climb to altitude, and shoot down enemy bombers. In order to do this, the Comet carried only a few minutes of fuel, meaning it had to return to its base as a glider. It could hardly be called a success. With its highly dangerous landing characteristics alone, the Me-163 was just too fast. The pilots didn't have enough time to get a good shot at the slow-flying bombers, and the Comet literally overshot its targets. However, a very successful swept-wing fighter was to see the light of day in 1947. North America designed a jet with a wing sweep of 35 degrees for the first time after Germany used a flow engine. This type of engine had a much smaller frontal surface in comparison with the British engines, which were all equipped with a centrifugal compressor. The flow engine allowed a more streamlined design of the surrounding airframe. For the first time, a flying tail was used, making the aircraft more maneuverable. The final result was a fighter that made the others look ridiculous, the F-86 Sabre. In one fell swoop, Great Britain had lost its leading position. In February 1948, the British Ministry of Supply published a specification for a fighter interceptor for the Royal Air Force. This aeroplane was to be the answer to the new threat of Russian long-range bombers, and also indirectly to the superiority of the American Sabre. Several constructors came up with a proposal, one of them being Hawker Aviation. At that time, the chief designer at Hawker was Sidney Cam. Cam was an aviation genius who had already been responsible for a number of highly successful fighter designs. The first was the Hawker Cygnet, a light aeroplane that first flew in 1924. It weighed no more than 375 pounds, less than the weight of a modern drop tank. But Sidney Cam's most successful design was probably the famous Hurricane. This fighter flew as early as 1935, and in the hands of the RAF pilots during World War II, it shot down more enemy aircraft than all other British aircraft and anti-aircraft artillery combined. A total of nearly 14,500 Hurricanes were built, of which this was the very last. It was appropriately named the last of the many. On September 2nd, 1947, the first Hawker jet, the P-1040, made its maiden flight. At that time, the RAF was equipped with the newest versions of the Meteor and wasn't interested in this aircraft. The Admiralty, however, was still looking for a jet fighter that was adapted for carrier-based operations and decided to buy the P-1040. Renamed the Seahawk, the P-1040 was popular with the Royal Navy, as well as with foreign navies such as the Dutch Marine. More than 550 Seahawks were eventually built. In 1948, the wings of the P-1040 were swept back to an angle of 35 degrees and it became the P-1052. The tail surfaces, however, remained unswept. An expansion of the 1040, which eventually led nowhere, was the P-1072. This was equipped with an Armstrong Siddeley Snarler rocket in the tail. The P-1072 had a good rate of climb, but the project was cancelled after only a few test flights. The first all-swept Hawker design was the P-1081. For the first time, a straight-through jet pipe was used instead of the fork jet pipe of the P-1040. The engine itself was still the centrifugal flow Rolls-Royce Nene of the first P-1040 prototype. On the 3rd of April 1951, the P-1081 crashed, killing Hawker's test pilot Wimpy Wade. The cause of the accident has never been fully established, but it is thought that Wade, tempted by the all-swept design of the P-1081, had gone for a transonic dive. It is certain that he broke the sound barrier since a sonic bang was heard before the impact. However, the tail of the P-1081 was not designed for supersonic speeds, leaving Wade with no effective means to pull out of his dive. On July the 20th, 1951, the P-1067, the prototype of the Hunter, made its first flight. A total of 3 prototypes were built, of which the first 2 were powered by the brand new Rolls-Royce Avon, and the third by the Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire. After a while, the first prototype, the WB-188, was equipped with an Avon RA7R, the R standing for reheat. In this configuration, Hawker decided to attempt the world's speed record, which at that time was held by an American who reached a speed of 715.75 miles per hour with a standard production Sabre. Neville Duke pushed the record to 727.63 miles per hour, but the WB-188 wasn't a standard Hunter. It had received a new pointed nose cap and a more streamlined outer windscreen, and no other Hunter would ever again be powered by an afterburning Avon, since it was found that the fuel consumption was far too high and internal fuel capacity too low to give the aeroplane operational endurance. But more important than the speed record was the fact that the Hunter was the first British aeroplane to break the sound barrier in a shallow dive. The Hawker test pilots took great pleasure in aiming sonic booms at the factories of their rivals, de Havilland and Supermarine, where development was proceeding on the DH-110 and the Swift. Without a doubt, the Hunter was the greatest success of post-war British aviation. However, this success was slow in coming, as the development of the Hunter saw a long succession of technical problems and frustrations, and by the time it came into service, its teething troubles were far from over. Number 43 Squadron, based at Loikers in Scotland, was the first unit to receive the Hunter F1 as a successor to the Meteor F8. Next were number 54 and 247 squadrons at Odiham, and number 222 Squadron, also based at Loikers. The F2 was almost identical to the F1, but it was powered by the Sapphire 101 instead of the Rolls-Royce Avon. The F2 joined the RAF in September 1954 with number 257 Squadron, and in February 1955 with No. 263 Squadron, both based at Wattisham. The problems that the early hunters experienced were numerous. Some of these were radio reliability, canopy misting, an inefficient air brake, and too little internal fuel capacity, which limited flying time to 50 minutes. More serious problems were experienced with the armaments. Firing the 4 extremely powerful 30mm Aden cannon had a number of unexpected effects, including cracking the surrounding structure, gases piling up in the fuselage, and ejected cases damaging the underside of the fuselage and the air brake. However, the biggest problems of all were caused by the RA-7 Avon engine, the compressors of which surged when the aircraft's guns were fired, resulting in a flameout. The fact that this problem was only discovered on a standard production F-1 was down to a silly coincidence. Hawker had carried out the armament tests on the 3rd prototype, which was powered by the Sapphire, an engine which was virtually surge-proof. The Avon was the first Rolls-Royce built flow engine, and, like the Hunter, its development was long and difficult. It remains a mystery as to why Hawker preferred it to the Sapphire, which was more powerful and more technically sound. It wasn't until the new Avon 200 series in the F6 that Hawker's choice proved to be correct, and the Hunter got the engine it deserved. A commercial opportunity arose in 1952 when NATO decided to sponsor the acquisition of a modern European fighter. An American team of pilots, among them Chuck Yeager, evaluated the Hunter against the Supermarine Swift, which was the RAF's favorite at the time. Bill Bedford again.
I think the Hunter was obviously more maneuverable because it had a lower wing loading and a very good thrust-to-weight ratio. The Swift went in for reheat system, and they had very major problems indeed, one with longitudinal control, 2 with surge problems with the intake engine combination that they were using, and its maneuverability at altitude left quite a lot to be desired. It was evaluated and did not get very much popularity.
As a result of the evaluation, the United States decided to sponsor the acquisition of 950 Hunter F-4s, some of which were to enter service with the RAF and the Danish Air Force. However, most of these Hunters were to fly with the Belgian and Dutch Air Forces. Production lines were established in Belgium and the Netherlands, where the F-4 and later the F-6 were built under license. In Belgium, the Hunter flew with the 1st wing at Beauvechain, the 9th wing at Bercy, and the 7th wing at Chevron, where these shots were taken. Some of the F-4s in these pictures are already equipped with the so-called Sabrinas, the blisters on the underside of the fuselage that connected the links of the ammunition. Sabrinas were named after a particularly well-endowed 50s starlet. The Belgians kept the Hunter in active service for a very brief period and then sold it at the first opportunity. The various technical problems that were dogging the aeroplane in these early years had given it something of a bad reputation.
Development problems are an inevitable part of the life of any airplane. They are the ones that stimulate a lot of attention in the press, but with development, these are overcome, and as the Hunter proved, it turned out to be a very successful aeroplane, but of course it lives with a reputation of some of the early problems that were experienced with it.
Development went on, and eventually all the early problems were solved. The wing's leading edges were redesigned, and the wing itself received a number of hard points, allowing external tags to be carried, as well as an impressive array of weapons. New external stores were tested on the Hunter, such as the Fairey Fireflash air-to-air missile, which wasn't accepted, or the drain pipes that came into operational use on the F-6. In 1956, a thrust reverser was tested on the prototype of the F-6 to shorten the landing distance. However, a braking parachute proved to be less complicated and less expensive. Another development was the two-seater. When the RAF decided to replace its Vampire T-11s, Hawker proposed the two-seater as an advanced trainer. Bill Bedford played an important role in this operation.
In 1959, we wanted to put the Hunter two-seater on the map as an ideal advanced trainer. The board were persuaded to put a powerful smoke installation on the aeroplane so that we could accentuate various maneuvers. But in particular, we wanted to demonstrate the spin and spin recovery characteristics of a swept-wing aeroplane. This was the first time that this had been done in a public display.
And now an aerobatic high spot. Bill Bedford, Hawker's chief test pilot, takes up to Hunter 66A.
My display consisted of low-level aerobatics, followed by a high-speed flypast, then pulling up to 18,000 feet with a smoke on, and at the top, pulling the stick hard back, full opposite rudder, full out spin aileron, and the aeroplane carried out one or two flick maneuvers before settling down into a steady spin, coming down at some 24,000 feet a minute rate of descent. We were demonstrating this in Switzerland on one occasion, and I could see behind me Mount Pilatus one moment, Emmen Airfield the next. I just monitored the RPM and jet pipe temperature, watched the altimeter very carefully, and as my minimum recovery altitude of 6,000 feet came up, I applied opposite rudder, fed the stick for a crack-a-bin spin aileron. The spin stopped instantaneously, and I had this great feeling of professional pride as Emmen Airfield was in front of me. Seconds later, I found the ground was abnormally close, and I was pointing vertically at it. I selected max lift flap, fed on power, pulled to the edge of the buffet in the full knowledge that I was probably going to run out of altitude. The situation got a little less worse, and then I realized that I was going to make it with a few hundred feet to spare, let the aircraft go down to treetop level, pulled up, rolled, landed, taxied in, stepped out of the airplane with a smile on my face as if that was part of my normal display, and never told anyone about it till 18 years later. My problem was very simple. The ground over which I was spinning was 500 feet higher than the airfield, and because I'd done an unorthodox letdown into Emmen Airfield, I hadn't reset my altimeter, which just goes to show that even a monkey can fall from a tree, and I very nearly did.
However, the RAF chose the Little Folland Gnat as the Vampire replacement. The Gnat became well loved in the hands of the Red Arrows, but it was a disappointment in many other ways. The aeroplane was so small that some pilots couldn't fit into the cockpit, and it was completely useless for advanced weapons training. Eventually, the RAF bought the Hunter T-7 for its tactical weapons units. The Fleet Air arm also bought the two-seater in the T-8 version, equipped with an arrestor hook.
All ready to go. throttle closed, high pressure cork on, master bar on, press starter button.
The T7 was powered by the Avon RH21 Mark 22 with a static thrust of 7,425 pounds. This was still the original basic engine, but it featured considerable improvements. The aeroplane that was presented by Bill Bedford was the Mark 66, equipped with a big Avon, a 200 series RA-28, providing 10,000 pounds or 4,510 kilos of thrust.
Dunsfold Tower, Hawker 7, takeoff clearance, over.
Hawker 7, Dunsfold Tower, you're cleared for immediate takeoff.
Check RPM and JPT. Brakes off, open to full throttle.
The T7 was based on the F4. Hawker designed the two-seater in such a way that only the front fuselage differed from the fighter, with the rest of the airframe being identical. In that way, Hawker could rebuild the fighters into trainers, and this was regularly done.
Now carry out a loop as briefed. Three and a half G, that's about right. Maintain the back pressure on the stick. Very good. We are now at about 40,000 feet. I'll show you a spin to port. Full left rudder, stick hard back and outspin aileron.
The Hunter had very straightforward spin characteristics. However, trainees were not allowed to provoke a spin on purpose during a solo flight, although as these pictures show, recovery action wasn't very complicated.
Recovery action, full opposite rudder with stick forward and central. We'll do some more next sortie. Now take me back to base. Speed reduced to 230 knots. Lower flaps and undercarriage. Give the tower a call. Dunsfold Tower, Hawker 7, finals.
Hawker 7, Dunsfold Tower, clear to land.
On this landing, I want you to use the tail parachute. Select as soon as your main wheels touch the runway. Watch your speed. Aim to come over the boundary at 125 knots.
The main advantage of the Hunter trainer over the Gnat was its suitability for weapons training. The aeroplane could be equipped with 1 or 2 Aiden cannon, and it had 4 wind pylons, using most of the weaponry that was representative of the fighters of that period. Hawker had chosen the side-by-side cockpit instead of the tandem cockpit of the Gnat. Since the stepped-up rear cockpit wasn't built yet, the Hunter layout proved to be the best for weapons training. The student and the instructor had the same view of the target during aiming, allowing the instructor to make corrections where necessary. Although the Hunter was to excel in the ground attack role, it was originally designed as an interceptor for high-altitude nuclear bombers, which is why it featured the 4 Aiden cannon. One single burst from these extremely powerful cannon made the pressurized bombers blow apart. The power of the cannon posed a number of problems on the Hunter itself, however. When the Aidens were fired during a long salvo at altitude, the nose of the aeroplane dipped because of the tremendous recoil. This problem was overcome by fixing blast deflectors that directed the blast downwards, which pushed the nose upwards. Eventually, the Hunter became a very stable aircraft and was able to deliver its ammunition with deadly
Red 1
accuracy.
turning live.
Red 1, clear live.
Red 2 turning live.
Red 2, clear live.
Red 3 turning live.
Red 3, clear live.
Turn in now. That's right. Don't let the nose drop too low. Now reverse the bank and start wristing forward to keep the sight stable as we're turning in. Don't overcorrect. Now let the pepper come back on the flag. Smoothly now. Red 1 turning live. Coming into range now. Well, that didn't look too bad. Your line was good, but we'll wait till we see how many strikes there are on the flag. Red 3, all ammo expended. Clear, complete.
Owing to the excellent aerodynamic design of the hood, the two-seater was as fast as the fighter during level flight, and it was also supersonic in a dive. This student has taken off for his first solo transonic dive. The early Hunters had very poor longitudinal control, especially at high Mach numbers. Therefore, the aeroplane was fitted with an electrically activated tail plane which followed the movement of the elevators at maximum deflection. At the end of the 50s, most of the development problems were solved, and the Hunter enjoyed increasing popularity among pilots. The public also loved the Hunter demonstrations by Hawker and the RAF at the annual SBAC shows at Farnborough. The new Avon 200 series engines resisted almost any form of mishandling before flaming out. The rest of the aeroplane also proved to be very reliable. It is said that a pilot once put his Hunter through an unorthodox 14G maneuver, even though the design limit was 7.5G. The only feature of the Hunter that regularly broke down was the G meter. The needle got stuck at the right-hand stop. The 50s, most of the development problems were solved, and the Hunter enjoyed increasing popularity among pilots. The public also loved the Hunter demonstrations by Hawker and the RAF at the annual SBAC shows at Farnborough. The new Avon 200 series engines resisted almost any form of mishandling before flaming out. The rest of the aeroplane also proved to be very reliable. It is said that a pilot once put his Hunter through an unorthodox 14G maneuver, even though the design limit was 7.5G. The only feature of the Hunter that regularly broke down was the G meter. The needle got stuck at the right-hand stop. Number 111 Squadron at North Weald was one of the first squadrons to receive the F4. 2 years later, the F6 came along, and it was on this that the famous aerobatic team, the Black Arrows, was formed. At the end of the 50s, defence budgets were relatively healthy, and the price of a fighter aircraft wasn't as astronomically high as it is today. That's why the Royal Air Force was able to put on the huge and impressive displays that were typical of the period. Nowadays, it is almost impossible to imagine a British aerobatic team composed of 9 front-line fighter aircraft.
right. Change to box. Go. Pulling up now. Big formation. Go. Stand by for smoke. Smoke.
Thanks to its agility, its high thrust-to-weight ratio and its stability, the Hunter was well suited to perform formation aerobatics. In 1960, the Black Arrows performed their last display on this aeroplane. Even today, more than 30 years on, the Hunter is still flown by the aerobatic team, the Patrouille de Suisse. Switzerland is a politically neutral country and only buys what military equipment it thinks best, regardless of the politics of the country of origin. Therefore, when it planned an evaluation that would lead to the acquisition of a new jet fighter, any country could enter a candidate. The evaluation was promised to be tough but impartial, and it was clear that winning it meant a big sale. The most notable competitors were the Czech-built MiG-15, the Swiss P-16, the brand new Saab Draken, the French Mystère 4, the Canadair Sabre 6, the F-86, and the Hunter F-6.
Now, the Hunter won that evaluation largely because it had more powerful armament, it could carry more, or it could go further than any of the other competitors. Well, the Sabre was an outstandingly successful aeroplane in that it had a slab tail which gave it very good maneuverability at high Mach number. However, its load-carrying capability was not quite the same as that of the Hunter, and the Hunter could either carry twice the warload the same distance or go twice the distance with the same warload. Also, with the large engine in the Hunter, it would outperform the Sabre in terms of climb with fairly similar level speed, but very much better acceleration. But it was a very strong, a very thorough evaluation with the aircraft in the roles of interceptor fighter and ground attack. And it had to be capable of maneuvering in the confines of the Meiringen Valley to prove it had the necessary maneuverability to cope with the mountainous terrain. That evaluation did immense amount of good because in parallel with the American evaluation, which resulted in the airplane selling offshore to countries like Belgium and Denmark and the Netherlands, it also stamped the aircraft, and the Middle East bought it in quantity.
The first Hunter Mark 58s out of a batch of 100 were delivered in April 1958, serial numbers J4001 to J40-100. The Swiss Air Force, like the Swiss Army, is organized to make maximum use of the strategic advantages of the mountains. The number of airfields are planted in the Alps using hangars blasted out of the rocks. During a scramble, the aeroplane is pulled out of the shelter and the engine is started during the tow. Flying in the mountains is extremely difficult and dangerous. But for a pilot who knows what he is doing, it offers a number of important advantages. For instance, when carrying out a ground attack, it is possible to pop up from behind a mountain at the very last moment, deliver your ammunition and disappear behind another mountain before the enemy troops have had time to return fire or before guided surface-to-air missiles can get locked on. Apart from selling 100 aeroplanes, the Swiss evaluation had another important effect on the Hunter program. During the tests, it was noticed that the aeroplane performed extremely well in a ground attack role, a function for which the aeroplane had never been designed, but its powerful cannon, large wing area, high thrust, agility and sturdiness meant that everything about the Hunter seemed right for this kind of mission.
Miro 2, risultat 4. Bambini Gaza riparo, mit Granada. Gaza 1.
In 1958, the RAF wanted a new ground attack aircraft to replace its Venoms in the Middle East. The original idea was to buy a small and cheap aircraft, such as the Gnat or the Jet Provost, but against all the odds, it was the Hunter that won an evaluation at Aden, which resulted in the acquisition of 102 F-6 Hunters. After some minor modifications which optimized the F-6 for ground attack in hot climates, the FGA-9 was born. By fitting the FGA-9 with a camera nose, it became the FR-10, FR standing for Fighter Reconnaissance. A tribute to the Hunter is the fact that it was still flying during the closing years of the 20th century, more than 50 years after its maiden flight. In Great Britain, it was still operated by the Royal Navy, where it was based at the station in Yeovilton. Most of the naval Hunters were GA-11s, which were slightly modified F-4s fitted with an arrestor hook and a light in the nose. Another Hunter serving the Royal Navy was the T-8 two-seater. The most striking version of the trainer was the T-8M, of which only 3 were built. It was operated by No. 899 Squadron of the Fleet Air Arm to train Sea Harrier pilots in the use of the Ferranti Blue Fox radar. The fitting of this radar led to a completely different radome, as well as a special cockpit layout. Apart from this particular T-8M was carrying air combat telemetry pods. This T-8 made its first flight in 1958 and was the first to be converted to the T-8M in 1979. In the 90s, the Hunters of the Fleet Air Arm were operated by the Fleet Requirements and Air Direction Unit, the FRADU, based at Yeovilton, where these shots were taken in 1991. When the Navy bought the GA-11 in the early 60s, it was to be used as a link between the Gnat Advanced Trainer and the operational Navy fighters, and to provide additional strategic training. A total of 40 XRAF F-4s were bought, but most were converted to GA-11s. Some were fitted with a camera nose, and designated PR-11. Like the T8, the GA-11 is powered by the Avon 100 series, which is started by means of cartridges. This T8 taxis in after a training session. Judging by the student's helmet cover, it was probably an instrument navigation flight. The Hunter has been in service with the Navy for many years now, and the aeroplane could be called an old-timer, so members of the ground crew treat it with something approaching love and respect. They know the Hunter like the back of their hands, and the post-flight check has almost become automatic. Thanks to their knowledge and experience, the Hunter can be kept flying for many more years. This technician changes the cartridges that serve to start the Avon, preparing the Hunter for its umpteenth start and umpteenth flight, and there is nothing to indicate that it will be its last. From drizzly England to the bone-dry south, this is the desert in the north of Chile, stuck between the Andes and the Pacific Ocean. In this hot and dusty environment, the airbase of Antofagasta is situated. At the end of the 60s, Chile bought some 40 Hunters, most of which were FGA-71s, and the remainder FR-71s and T-71 two-seaters. When General Pinochet seized power during the military coup of 1973, 2 Hunters attacked the presidential palace La Modena in Santiago with great precision, forcing the Allende government to surrender. In 1990, Chile returned to democratic government, and its Air Force served one of the few well-functioning democracies in South America. Because of the strained relations with neighboring countries Peru and Bolivia, the Chilean Air Force remained on constant alert. In the north of the country, patrol flights were flown regularly, and the pilots trained as an ongoing process. The aeroplanes were upgraded by the Chileans, and were fitted with a radar warning receiver, a device that tells the pilot when his aircraft has been picked up by enemy radar, and that also gives him the type and bearing of the emitter. The presence of the RWR is revealed by 3 antennae on the tip of the vertical tail and 1 in the tail bullet. This film, which was shot in the 90s, shows 2 aircraft, an FR-71 and an FGA-71, on a low-level navigation flight, followed by a strafing exercise. The basic FGA-9 was developed for low-altitude flying in the Middle East, and the conditions in this part of Chile are similar. One of the special features of the FGA-9, much appreciated by the men who have to fly in this hot climate, is the enhanced cockpit air conditioning system. Heat reduces the power of a jet engine, and it is obvious that the high thrust of the Avon 200 series was one of the standout features that made the FGA-9 superior to its competitors during the Aden evaluation. Even when heavy external loads have to be carried, which is often the case for ground attack, the Hunter still takes off without any problem and cruising speeds remain relatively high. All pilots usually claim to have the best aeroplane, and this is also true of the Hunter flyers. But in Chile, the Hunter was particularly popular with its pilots, partly because of its flying characteristics, but also because of its great sturdiness. During a Chilean test of retired weapons, a fragmentation bomb exploded during dropping, blasting dozens of holes in the Hunter that carried it. Nevertheless, the pilot was able to continue flying and eventually landed his aircraft as if nothing had happened. Instead of loading cannon in the aeroplane, Hawker opted for another technique. The Hunter was fitted with a full cannon removable gun pack, which is entirely replaced after each firing session. This operation took only a couple of minutes, allowing a better turnaround time in case of war. The old gun pack could then be checked, cleaned and loaded without the technicians being rushed by a waiting aircraft. As the total weight of the gun pack was that of a normal-sized car, specialized equipment was necessary. The gun pack technique was made possible because Hawker decided to place the jet intakes in the wing roots, leaving lots of free space in the fuselage and the nose free for radars or cameras. This may seem obvious today, but at the time that the Hunter was designed, many jets, including the Sabre, the Thunderjet and the Mist Air, had a nose intake. In the early 70s, Kingston received a new order from Switzerland for another 60 Hunters. Only this time the Swiss didn't want new aircraft, they wanted second-hand ones. 52 ex-RAF F-6 fighters were refurbished and modified to the Swiss Mark 58A standard, and another 8 trainers were upgraded to T-68s. The Hunter was designed to last for at least 4,000 flying hours, which corresponds to at least 30 operational years of service, and after refurbishment, the clock was reset to 0. The factory at Kingston still had the original tools and rigs that were used to build new Hunters, and while some of the employees were working on the production of the Harrier, others were carrying out the first phases of the refurbishment of the Hunter. Final assembly was carried out in Switzerland at the Federal Aircraft Factory in Emmen. The Mk58A was more than just an old F-6. The aeroplane was upgraded with new electronic systems and the engine was also changed. The Mark 58A was now powered by the Avon Mark 207, which was a high modification standard of the original 203. After assembly, each part was tested, from the flaps and landing gear down to the smallest detail. Everything had to be in perfect working order before the aircraft took to the sky. A healthy Avon Mark 207 delivered 10,000 pounds of static thrust at 8,000 RPM. Finally, the Hunter made its maiden flight after the refurbishment, and the test pilots put it through maneuvers that would reveal any possible deficiencies. If no defects were found, the Hunter received its final camouflage finish and was handed over to the squadron. During the Hunter 80 program that began in 1982, the Swiss Hunters were upgraded to adapt to modern warfare techniques. The aeroplanes were fitted with flare chaff dispensers and RWR, and in addition to the Sidewinder, they were given provision to fire the Maverick air-to-surface guided missile. These improvements meant that the Swiss Hunters could hardly be considered old aeroplanes, not even by modern standards. These shots were taken on the 14th of November 1991 during Operation Strada 91. A number of sections of Swiss motorway had been designated as emergency runways for military jets in case of war, when conventional airfields might be damaged by enemy action. These sections of motorway can be made into operational airfield within a couple of hours. In November 1991, this section of the M2 near Ludrino was used for that purpose for the first time during a training exercise. These exercises are not only for the pilots who have to land their aircraft in between obstacles such as trees, high-tension wires or bridges, but also for the ground troops who would have to protect the airfield against enemy attack. Technicians too are trained in maintaining, refueling and arming the aircraft in exceptional circumstances. During Strada 91, 580 soldiers and 70 civilians were employed. 130 tons of road signs, crash barriers and other motorway equipment had to be removed. 4 units of radar-guided AAA cannons were installed, and 25 tons of material used for communication, maintenance and armament had to be transported. Only 6 hours after the traffic had been rerouted, the first Hunters and F-5 Tigers landed on the motorway. And just 2 hours after the last jet had taken off, the road was reopened. In the modern era, the Hunter is a star of the air show, and never more so than in July 2001, when Kemble Airfield in Gloucestershire played host to one of the most special air shows ever staged in the United Kingdom. During a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Hunter, no fewer than 15 of these classic jet fighters assembled to give a breathtaking display of formation flying. The climax of the event came when all 15 flew in a delta formation. Now sit back and get a unique pilot's eye view of how the formation took shape with the help of our 6 in-cockpit cameras and air-to-air camera ship.
As we coast in, we'll be coming right onto east. Coming right now.
Ouais, c'est juste, c'est juste.
On va peut-être passer de l'autre côté.
Ouais, c'est juste, on en est là.
Voilà, maintenant tu peux passer de l'autre côté.
Alors là, le
Tu peux
poulet.
passer de l'autre.
Clear join.
Green. Alors, les green join.
Blue, clear join.
Ok.
Voilà, c'est là, on en est là.
Power.
Voilà leur fameux pont.
Coming a little bit right now. Campbell, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, roger.
Silver, join.
Tailor up.
Holding down.
They were in.
Thank you, strike your whip.
Been good, this one on the far right now coming. The two jets far left and far right, stopping just a tiny bit. That's it, good there, hold it there, that's it, you got it.
2 minutes.
Covered.
C'est génial, c'est fantastique. C'est superbe.
Okay, Hunter's looking good, strike master leaving you now, till next to the glory.
On the ground. 1 minute.
Okay.
Five miles, no more change.
And then finally there it was. 15 hunters in formation over Kemble. Once the formation had passed, a complex plan to get every hunter onto the ground was put into practice. This gave the huge crowds that had flocked to see this unique celebration of a very special aircraft the opportunity to see them fly past one more time.
Well done, mate.
With every aircraft safely landed, some of the pilots were able to reflect upon what they had just been part of.
Everyone was there, everyone got started, absolutely. Everyone's radio worked. And for aircraft at 50 years old, that's amazing. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'm extremely proud and privileged to be in the position. Very emotional. Need a beer.
Yeah, no, it was tremendous. It really was. You don't really know what's happening. You're just sitting in there, and you hope you're not messing up. That's what it really is. You know, you just hope you're not spoiling it. I mean, there are 14 other guys there, and you thought, please don't let it be me that screws up on this one. And when you're running in, you know you're in that big formation. Oh, just great. And it's not until you land, your brain goes, that was just great.
Yeah, that's something. Like all formations, you're working hard at the time, so you sit there in formation, you hold it in, you go across, and having gone across and we turned off to the south to start sort of splitting up to rejoin, I suddenly thought, I've probably taken part in the last big hunter formation ever. It's quite something.